Hi guys! Welcome to another book talk with Livingston Parish Library. My name is Danielle. I am the Youth Services Manager at the Denham Springs Walker branch, and today I'm so excited to bring you books about my favorites, the dangerous but beautiful fairies and the fae. So first off, there's a difference between fairies and the fae. And I'm not talking Disney fairies either. Usually fairies and the fae are very dangerous. Typically fairies are little creatures that do not look like humans at all. They have many different species and they are usually governed or ruled by the fae. The fae look like humans except they have pointy ears and they usually have magical abilities and they're faster, they're stronger, they're usually immortal so they live for a very long time, and for the most part, sometimes they have an aversion to iron, so they can't touch it or it can kill them. So fairies have been around for centuries. All of the fairy lore that we know has come from Ireland and Scotland and even England. And the bard himself, William Shakespeare, wrote one of his comedies, A Midsummer's Night Dream, all about the world of fairy. So of course, it would make for great YA fantasy to mix humans and fairies and fae and see what happens. Books about the fae are pretty much an automatic read for me. If there's a book about them, I'm gonna read them. They were very big 10 years ago, whenever the whole vampires and werewolves and fallen angels were a big thing. Fairies were a big thing. Move over, Edward and Jacob, Team Legolas. However, there has been a resurgence of fairies, and I am living for it. One of these series that I'm not going to talk about today because I already went over it in a previous book talk is called Cruel Prince by Holly Black. It is on this year's Louisiana Teen Reader's Choice list. Holly Black is a staple in YA fairy fiction. She has a lot of books about fairy, and Cruel Prince is actually set in the same world as another book series she has called Tithe. And both of those books will be on the book list that we post later, so check them out. So the first book I want to talk about today is probably one of my favorites of all time. It's by the same author who wrote Throne of Glass, which I fangirled about in a previous video. It's definitely an upper YA or what they call a new adult book, but it's amazing. It is called A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. A Court of Thorns and Roses is about main character who is a human, Feyre, and she lives in a world where fairies and humans coexist together. However, that there has been a giant wall that was put in between them to keep them apart because fairies like to prey on humans. So Feyre lives in this tiny, poor town right next to the wall. Her family was once very rich and they lost it all, so now they're very poor. And Feyre is the only one keeping their family alive. So she has to go into the woods and hunt in order for her family to survive. And it's very dangerous for humans to hunt in those woods. But Feyre doesn't care because she absolutely hates the fae. One day she is out hunting, she is desperate, and she finds a wolf. But it is a very large wolf, and she thinks there's probably something a little bit different about it. However, she kills it, and she almost feels like it lets her kill it, which is weird. So she brings it back to her house when all of a sudden a giant beast bursts through the door. The beast tells her that she killed one of his sentinels, so he can either kill her or she can go to the fairy world and live out her days. So the beast, who turns out to be a high fae, which is one of their ruling fae nobility, brings her to his large manor house and says that you can live here. At first, she is very reluctant, but the more she stays there, the more she learns about the fairy world. She learns about a magical blight on the land that is affecting the fae. And as she's growing to like the fae and the fairy world, she might just realize that she's the only one that can save them. So if you're like, this sounds familiar, it is actually a reimagining of Beauty and the Beast. But I didn't even know that at the beginning until I looked it up later, because it's probably one of the most unique and different Beauty and the Beast retellings that I've ever read. And I've read a bunch. One of the best things I love about Sarah J. Maas as an author is her evolution across like the series. So one minute you're, in a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then, 2 or 3 books in, it is so different. The story has changed and opened up so drastically. And A Court of Thorns and Roses is such a great introduction into the world of fairies. She goes over all of the courts and the magical abilities and the different species, but it also is just a great representation of a YA fantasy. There's everything you could possibly want: romance, action, adventure, everything. This next book is also a newer fairy book. It was actually on last year's Louisiana Teen Readers' Choice list. It is a YA standalone, so there's no series to it. It's called An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. So in The Enchantment of Ravens, fairies, or the fair folk as they're sometimes called, are obsessed with human craft because they can't do it. Anything from baking bread to music to painting or writing they cannot do, only humans can do it. So they are obsessed with it, and they trade enchantments, which is basically fairy magic, for human craft. Our main character, Isabel, is a painter. She creates beautiful portraits of the fae, and they trade her enchantments for her services. Well, when she receives her first royal commission, she makes a grave mistake. See, the person who commissioned it was Prince Rook of the Autumn Court, and she paints human sorrow into his eyes, and he takes offense to this, even if it may be true, because his throne and his crown and even his life could be jeopardized if they saw a human emotion in a fae prince. He is super angry, so he takes Isabel to his kingdom to stand trial for her crimes. But when they get there, they realize something is super wrong, and they keep getting attacked from every angle. So now they have to depend on each other as they're trying to figure out what's going on in his kingdom and identify the corruptness in the fairy courts. They start to grow closer. And in a world where human emotion and human connection between fairy and humans is forbidden and against the law, it's not a good thing. However, it might be the one thing worth fighting for. This book is a fun, quick read. Like I said, it's a standalone, so it's just this one story wrapped up in one book, and it gives a good introduction to the fairy court system and the fairy world and how they interact with humans. Although every story is different, they all kind of have the same themes. And this particular book is romance heavy if you like that kind of thing. But this author does have another book called Sorcery of Thorns, which I liked even better. It's about magical libraries set in this magical world, and librarians are essentially warriors that have to take care of these magical artifacts and magical books. So the next one for today is the first book in a YA trilogy. It has the fairy lore in it, all from Scottish mythology, but it is set in the 1800s in Edinburgh, Scotland, so it's also a historical book, and it even has some steampunk aspects to it, so it has everything going on. It is called The Falconer by Elizabeth May. Elena, our main character, is the only daughter of a Scottish nobleman in Edinburgh in the 1800s. Elena has everything a girl could want in her time. She has wealth, brains, beauty, and a title, but she's a liar. In fact, she only looks the part of an aristocratic young lady. She's actually living a double life. She has the rare ability to see the fae in their world. And these fae are basically obsessed with murdering humans. And a year ago, her mother was killed by one of the fae, so she has made it her life's mission to avenge her mother's death. And she uses her knack for seeing them and her inventions in order to help her do this. So as she's training and trying to avenge her mother's death, she realizes that she is a falconer, which is a line of female warriors who have been brought up to hunt and kill fairies. So things get a lot more complicated when her mentor turns out to be one of the fae, and they're sent on this quest in order to possibly save the world and maybe stop a fairy-human war. This book is fun. I love a good, dark type of fairy tale. This is definitely it. It has the elements of steampunk, which are really, really fun and kind of add to the whole historical fantasy part of it. There's so much emphasis on Scottish mythology and fairy lore, which I love. And there's lots of stabby, which is really fun. I mean, Who doesn't love that? So the last book on our list today has been around for a while. It's a little bit of a lower YA middle grade series. It's definitely one for the boys, as there is a boy main character. You've probably heard of it, especially since Disney Plus just released a movie based on the book, although don't judge the book by the movie. It is called Artemis Fowl by Owen Colfer. So Artemis Fowl is an evil genius. Or at least he thinks he is. He is a 12-year-old genius and a criminal mastermind because he is pulling off heists in order to get back his family's fortune. His father went missing and he is the only one left to keep the family afloat. They're about to go bankrupt, so he decides to steal a fairy, and in return he wants a pot of gold. But the fairy that he chooses to kidnap, Holly, might just give this evil genius a run for his money. So it turns out that Holly is a captain in the Leprechaun Unit, which is a police force of fairies that kind of control all fairies and creatures that have gone underground to get away from humans. Well, when he kidnaps her, a leprechaun comes looking for her, so now he has to fight off a bunch of deadly trained fairies in order to restore the Fowl family name and get the pot of gold. I really liked that this story had the main character as kind of the bad guy, because in any other story he would be the bad guy. But from his perspective, it's more like an anti-hero, and you do end up rooting for him, you know, every once in a while. So that was really fun. And the fights between him and these like deadly fairies is very fun. It's often like comical, and there's a lot of tension that keeps the story moving. I've heard this as Mission Impossible with fairies or Die Hard with fairies, so that seems fun. And this is definitely for the Harry Potter and the Percy Jackson fans, but with fairies. It's definitely a fun ride, and there are 8 books in the series, so you can keep having fairy fun. So that is it today about books on fairies and the fae. We will be posting a book list of more books with fairies and the fae. Some of them are a little bit older, some of them are new, but they're all a lot of fun. If you are participating in our 2020 summer reading program online, then this week's code word is "we are." And until next time, happy reading.